All right, students with disabilities. There are 5 ways in which a child is exceptional, or maybe I should say at least 5 ways of the 5 ways I looked at it. Number 1, their mental characteristics. Would you agree that there's a difference in the mental characteristics? How about sensory abilities? Your sight, your touch, communication abilities, behavior and emotional development, and then physical characteristics. Those are the 5 ways in which an exceptional child is different. And they can have several of these. It doesn't have to just be one. All right, Individuals with Disability Act. We've talked about that a little bit as you did your presentations, IDEA. And it also, back in the early days, was known as Public Law 94-142, which actually initiated in 1975. So actually, we've been going about 44 years now with students with disabilities. But I want you to, well, I don't know if you can think back that long, because I know you weren't even born, most of you, at that time. But I think about when this came about in 1975, you've been teaching for 12 or 14 years, never had a class on instructional strategies per se, never had a class on exceptional children. And then all of a sudden, you were giving kids to teach in that class, because before that time, we did what? We isolated them if we even allowed them to come to school. So I'll probably give them a soapbox and talk about that a little bit later on too, because it was a very trying time for teachers. If you think it's a trying time now for you, it was very trying for some of these teachers when they didn't have any training. But it was really, this act was really spurred by 2 court cases. And that's normally what happens is you'll have a court case, somebody will rule, and then somebody will say, oh, we better make a law because it's getting this way. And one was Park versus Pennsylvania in 1972. Now, gentlemen, since you're a smart person, you also enjoy a laugh, obviously, tell me, what does Park stand for? That's right.
Yep.
You will see how we were not politically correct back during that time. PARC stood for Pennsylvania Association of Retarded Children. We never, well, I shouldn't say we never, but most people don't use the word retard now. In fact, I'm reading a novel right now, and this guy is calling us one of the students a retard. And but anyhow, there's the Pennsylvania Association of Retarded Children, and they ruled that intellectually disabled students ages 6 through 21 should be provided with access to a free public education, and that children should be placed in regular classrooms if possible. Now, a lot of times we didn't even let the kids go to school, and now we had to put them in the regular classroom if possible. Of course, most people said, well, it wasn't possible. And so they didn't. In fact, when they started out and we had to put them in the, quote, regular classroom, where do you think they went? Art, PE, music, band, recess, and that was about it. And then Mills versus Board of Education, again in 1972, all school-aged children with disabilities must be provided a free and adequate education. Now, when these 2 court cases came, what legislator do you think really started to get behind this and push this? Anybody, I know you weren't born by then, but who was a fairly affluent, powerful legislator that had a sister?
I thought
had a sister that was, last name starts with a K.
Kennedy.
There you go. I knew somebody would get it. Good. But they were very influential in pushing this law through, simply because they had a sister that was disabled. Now, the features of IDEA, number 1, faith. And we talked about that a little while ago. That is not your favorite academic professor of education. It is, or fabulous. It is free, appropriate public education. You also, an evaluation is required before placement. In the past, sometimes we could just say, well, Wayne, you're special ed, get in that class. But you couldn't do that anymore after this law came. You had to test the child and then place them, assuming that they met the requirements. It has to be individualized. That's why we have an IEP that's called Individual education plan. And when this first started and teachers were writing IEPs, my God, you'd think there was twins or something, because every IEP almost read the same.
Oh, wow.
You know, everybody had more time to take tests. Everybody had less questions that they had to answer, less spelling words.
Notes handed to them.
And so we finally learned. I'll have to say that I really think teachers are much better today than they were back during the time when this first started in the 70s. They're much more prepared, have many more instructional strategies in their back, because right now we're supposed to make every kid successful. And back in the 70s, when you have so many people saying, we all have schools like we did in the 70s, back when I was going to school, oh my God, only about 30 or 40% of the kids graduated. So no wonder they did pretty well. The other 60 dropped out and went to work. LRE, least restrictive environment. You're supposed to put that child in the least restrictive environment that they can be successful. Due process, that's a real huge key in that, because if a parent doesn't like what's going on, they can request a hearing. And you have to afford them that hearing. And a real key is the involvement of parents. You hear me talk about this, so let me tell you one thing. There are so many laws governing special education. They have so many more rights than a normal student, that it really is important for teachers to really work with parents. You make a parent mad and they want to have hearings and bring lawsuits, I mean, they can do that because they have that power to ask for those things. And the best way to solve special education problems is for that teacher to befriend the parents and have the parents trust that teacher. Because a lot of times when they trust that teacher, they go listen to you. If you say, you know, Johnny's really had a rough time these last 5 weeks and I've been pulling out my hair, he might need to stay home one day and give me a chance to recuperate. And some parents would say, yeah, he drives me wild too, and would do that. But you say that to some parent you made mad, and they will sue you and take you to court. All right, we talked about FAPE, and it's a school district's duty to provide FAPE first and then least restrictive environment. The first job you have is to determine what is the appropriate education for that child. Parents, many of them, they don't really know what's appropriate public education, but they do know what their least restrictive environment is, because they want Miss Jones's classroom on the second floor, or they want to go to this school over here because that's where all their friends are. And even if you only have, like in some school districts, they only have one school that has all the self-contained EBD students and all that, and the parents don't want the child there, they want the child to go to this school, not even realizing they don't have a program for them. But that's what's on the parents' mind, is they're more interested in, for the most part, in least restrictive environment. But that is not the school district's responsibility. Your first, first duty is to provide that free, appropriate public education, and then hopefully you can do that and still provide a least restrictive environment. And like I said, the goal is to do both. Parents of students with disabilities are not exempted from standard fees. If you charge fees for certain things, they're not exempt any more than any other parent is. So you just need to keep that in mind. And we rarely charge for anything anymore, I think, in the public schools. And if a parent proves the school district can't provide FAPE, they can go to court and seek tuition or private therapy or both. And remember, we talked about one of those parents that didn't think that, in fact, it was Andrew versus Douglas, that didn't think that their child was getting a decent education or appropriate education. Sent to school $70,000. And folks, there are some schools that cost even more than that. And courts have awarded parents tuition because they felt the school has failed in education.
Do
All right.
schools ever voluntarily give it, or does it have to go, does it have to be sued?
Well, I would say that, I mean, I'm not going to say never. There may be a school that may have done that and said, you're right, we get it, and they just have to bite the bullet and do that. You know, at least here in the state, we do have a school for the blind, and we have a school for the deaf. So I mean, there are some other options as well. But even when they go there, school districts are supposed, if parents need it, to provide transportation there. You know, go pick up the child on a Friday evening and bring them back, take them to school that Sunday afternoon. So there are even still costs there. But I would say that I would rather try to find me a teacher and let them provide those services than to pay a school $70,000 to $100,000. I mean, that's just me. But yes, there are times when a school will say, you're right, we can't afford this thing. All right, so one of the first cases that we're going to talk about that actually started questioning what was being done as far as a free appropriate education was the board of Hendrick Hudson Central School versus Raleigh in 1982. And I believe that was one that Rebecca talked about, that she mentioned that as a case, and we kind of talked about it a little bit. But anyhow, it was a deaf student that enrolled in kindergarten. Now, this was 1982. What did we do in kindergarten back in the 80s?
Color.
Naps, take naps.
Take naps, color, socialization skills.
Half day.
Right, because that was what we were trying to do, is acclimate kids to kindergarten, social skills. Now, when we go to kindergarten, they expect to be what when they finish kindergarten?
Reading.
They better be reading something. You're exactly right. And so I want you to keep this in mind. In 1982, this was kindergarten, and they provided, and remember 82, this is not 2019, they provided with an FM hearing aid, which is amplified words spoken into a wireless receiver, instruction 1 hour a day from a tutor for the deaf, and a speech therapist 3 times per week. They did that for the deaf student back in 1982. Not only that, a sign interpreter was placed in her classroom on an experimental basis to determine the need to see if it needed to be continued. Well, the child was meeting with success, and so they decided they didn't need that interpreter. And so she stopped. Well, there was a teletype machine placed in the principal's office to communicate with parents. Since on a daily basis, both of the parents were deaf. So they had to have a way to communicate with parents, and it was before computers. And what really is impressive is several teachers during the summer took sign language in order to communicate, and they didn't teach the kid. They wanted to make that child feel comfortable and be able to communicate. So I really commend what was going on there. And the student had a very successful year. First deaf child to go to that school, and they really accommodated her. All right, now we move on to the next year. First grade. What did they have to do in first grade back in the 80s?
May I have your attention, please?
That was the crucial year.
You're parked in the back parking lot near the tennis gates. We'll be locking the gates in 5 minutes. Please remove your vehicle. Thank you.
Probably the rest of the time. I mean, there are a few that the light bulb comes on, but the bottom line, if you don't get that sound education in first grade, then you're missing a chance. So that's why the parents said, we want a full-time interpreter, because first grade is for all the marbles. And the district said, no, we're not going to do that. Your child was successful in kindergarten. We're going to keep doing the same things we're going to do, and she'll be successful. We feel confident. Well, like any good, caring, loving parent, what do? They sue the school district. And the court ruled in favor of the school system because they said that the student was performing successfully, and the school system was only required to offer an appropriate education. In fact, really, this is kind of where they talked about a minimum. And one of the judges, when he ruled, said school districts are not required to provide Cadillacs to the students when a serviceable Chevrolet will do the same trick. And so what we've ruled until Andrews is that it's a basic floor of opportunity. All we've got to do is provide something that has the opportunity to meet with success. And so that's what was done during that time. And like I said, the IEP should be reasonably calculated to provide educational benefit. How much benefit? Minimum. All right. Now let's have a couple scenarios just to make sure you're thinking now. Number one, if a child fails 1 year, does that mean they have not been given a free appropriate public education?
No.
No. It could be that the child was absent a lot. It could be the parents didn't work with at home and all that. It could be all kinds of things. Or maybe we set the bar too high for that child and didn't realize how severe it was. So just because they don't pass 1 year doesn't mean we haven't done our job. Now, I'd say if it happens about 7 or 8 years in a row, then we probably need to look at something. And there's court cases that will bear that out. Parents want a severely autistic child in the general education program above all else. In other words, they want the least restrictive environment in the general education. Is that correct? I mean, can they do that?
They can.
They can ask for it.
No.
They can ask for it, but bottom line, what's your duty?
Provide
To put them in the appropriate
Right.
program for them to meet success, regardless of what the parents say. Now, that doesn't mean that the parents won't take you to court. I'm going to tell you, you need to be able to get along with those parents and work it out and listen to them and do all you can. When this first started, I was a principal back in the 70s, and I actually had an attorney come to me. He had a child that had a learning disability, and he said he wanted the school district to provide horseback lessons to his child because that would help her self-esteem and she would do better in school because of that. Now, the school district denied it, and he didn't pursue it in court, but I mean, that was some of the things back early on that some people were asking for to help with that, because he said, you know, gosh, if she can enjoy riding a horse, it makes her feel better, and she'll feel better herself.
Got to give credit for trying.
I know, right?
How about if the child doesn't meet all IEP goals? No, because it doesn't meet all of them. Maybe you've set the bar too low, and you need to do more. So just because they don't meet all the IEP goals doesn't mean that you don't have them in the appropriate places. All right, autistic first grader growing behavior issues and general cognitive issues is falling behind academically. Excuse me, she's falling behind academically and becoming increasingly violent. Parents want PhD behavior therapists employed, and the school wants to employ trained paraprofessional. Who do you think won that?
School.
The school, because what we're talking about is, again, you don't have to provide the Cadillac, and you can certainly train some people to do well on that. All right, least restrictive environment. The magic phrase is to educate them with non-disabled peers to the maximum extent possible. And there are lots of variations to that least restrictive environment. You've got to determine that and decide what's best. Due to the Stafford case, and this was a case where parents sued the school district because they weren't pleased with the least restrictive environment, and in that court ruling, it said, parents, if you don't like it, the burden of proof is on you. Prior to that time, when somebody sued the school, the burden of proof was on the school district to show that they were in the right program, and then with that ruling, they said, parent, no, if you're suing the school district, then you're the one that's got to, you have the burden of proof. So that was huge there. All right, Ellie versus Ramsey Board of Education. MS was born with encephalopathy, how you pronounce it?
Encephalopathy.
Yeah, thank you. And autism-like behavior. At age 3, he became available for services, because when we have kids that are really severely handicapped, we can start services at age 3, and they go through what? Age 21, exactly. The team assembled. They all got together, the team, and the school wanted a segregated setting with some one-on-one services, and parents wanted a preschool setting. In other words, the parents in the school couldn't agree on what was the least restrictive environment. But notice that here's the thing. The team got together and reviewed and looked and made the decision that he needed to be in a segregated section with some one-on-one services, and they went to court. The first thing the court's going to do is look and see what steps has the school district taken to accommodate the child. What have you done for the child? The child's ability to receive an educational benefit from the regular program, they're going to look to see if that's appropriate, and they're going to look at the effect the child's presence has in the regular classroom, because you know that there are many students that disrupt the class. Just because they disrupt the class once or twice doesn't mean you say, oh, well, he gets to move out of my class now because he needs to move something else. You really have to work and make sure you use all kinds of strategies and instructional approaches and all kinds of things. Sometimes it takes 6 to 9 months to build up enough documentation to prove that. And then they might decide, well, maybe you're just not the teacher. Of course, we'll wait 9 months, we'll have a different teacher anyhow. And they ruled in favor of the school system in this. And the reason why is because the school could give some statistics on why they felt this was best. Now, saying that, we're going to talk just a little bit about RTI. Some of you, I think, Gwinnett may even call it something different, but it's response to intervention, and y'all may have to call it something else now, I believe. But basically, this is what we do now with kids before we put them into special education. We're going to look at that, we're going to see what's been done, and that's why I'm saying teachers are so much better off now, because we're taking kids in the past that didn't qualify for special education. They were just slow learners, and we're doing a lot with them to help them be successful as well. So my hat's off to teachers. Y'all are doing a great job with kids. But the 10 essentials is number one, all teachers understand the district procedures regarding response to intervention. And you know response to intervention, I'm assuming all of you know that that's when a child is not being successful. You meet as a team, you review everything, and then you decide how we can make Johnny successful. It's a district-wide and school-wide approach. It starts at the school, but district-wide, they may be able to provide some support as well. Parents and teachers understand the benefits of the RTI process. There are contact people in place who can explain RTI, provide support to teachers. I'm assuming every school has an instructional supervisor, an assistant principal, a special education teacher, or somebody that can explain the process of RTI at a school. Is that correct? Good. All right. Interventions correspond to the student's needs. That's what you do. You look at the student's needs, and then you come up with strategies and interventions to help that. Interventions are documented and assessed to determine if they're working. And there's nothing that drives a teacher crazier than you wanting a child placed in special ed, and you've used this strategy and it's not working, and you go back saying, oh, well, have you tried this strategy? Or have you tried that strategy? And so it almost sometimes takes 4 and 5 times of trying different strategies before they say, well, we'll test it. And then, of course, the school psychologist comes back and says, oh, doesn't qualify. So it just drives you mad sometimes. But you have to document progress, and you have to really monitor what that child's doing and what you're doing for that student. Teachers know how to respond to progress or the lack of progress, because sometimes we do get a lack of progress. And there's effective communication to ensure students move through the pyramid appropriately. You know, that pyramid of intervention where you start at base and you go all the way to the top. All teachers understand how to respond or who to contact when a parent notifies the district of a student's disability and requests a referral to special education or requests an evaluation. All right. Now, so then we've gotten past that. Let's talk about IDA, which is for students with disabilities. It is a federal law, and federal law trumps state laws, as we all know. To be eligible, a child must have a disability in one of the defined categories and needs special education and related services. Now, this is normally determined through a series of tests, and we'll probably get to a little bit later on, but while it's on my mind, I'll tell you now, it used to be back in the old days in the 70s that Patrick would come to school, and Patrick is of Chinese descent, and was struggling with reading because he didn't live in a home that spoke English, spoke Chinese. Well, when we give a test, we give it to him in what? English. Oh, he can't pass, so he needs what? Special ed, right? Now, if you can be testing kids, you have to test them in their native language. And I bet if they tested Patrick in Chinese, he'd do extremely well. So, you know, we have learned a lot since the 70s, and I think we'll talk about that a little bit as well on that. The Georgia categories, and you know, the federal has basically the same thing. Sometimes we just call them a little bit different, but the Georgia categories are mental retardation, hearing impairment, speech or language impairment, visual impairment, serious emotional disturbance, orthopedic impairments, autism, traumatic brain injury, and other health impairments, and then specific learning disabilities. Those are the recognized categories in Georgia. Okay? In national, autism, other health impaired, behavior and emotional disorders, intellectual and developmental disabilities, speech and language, learning disabilities, multiple disabilities, hearing problems, orthopedic, traumatic brain injury, visual, and deaf and blind. When I was typing this one time and showed I didn't catch a typo, I had deaf, D-A-T-H. But I said, yeah, that's a pretty severe disorder, isn't it? But it's deaf and blind. Provision. School districts are required to search for children with disabilities. In other words, our job, we don't just take the best and brightest, we have to teach all kids. And bottom line is every year schools are required to go out and look for kids that need services. Now, a lot of times they'll put something in the paper, they'll send a flyer home, they'll go to some of these housing projects and, and ask about kids, because bottom line, what you really want, you want these kids in school, because if you can get them at age 3, they have a much better job of overcoming their disability or learning how to adapt to it and being successful to when you just wait and you get them at age 5 or 6. And so it is important that they do a child find. It is required by law that you go out into your different neighborhoods and try to find them. Of course, as a superintendent, I used to say, I want to go find them because I'm going to set me up a mobile home park right in the next district, and I'm going to give free tuition to every parent that wants to live there and send their children to another school district, because it costs so much to educate a special education student that it, quite frankly, it's cheaper for me to pay for rent for a trailer than it is for me to pay for the education. And of course, I'm being a little bit cynical on that, but bottom line, really, as I mentioned earlier, it does cost a lot to educate kids with disabilities, or most kids with disabilities. And I certainly can't stand many $70,000 and $80,000 tuition payments. All right, you conduct screening of the children, advertise about the program, and other means to provide education to all. You do vision tests, hearing tests, that type of thing. Identification, eligibility must be determined through a variety of assessment, not through just one test. Because if I give you one test, you don't do well, I can't say, oh, he qualifies. It has to be a variety of tests, of different types of tests before, because it's serious when we place a child in special education. It used to be that a child would never get out of it. Once you were labeled special ed, you remained in it. At least now we're doing a much better job, and there are kids that are moved, back and forth on that. Schools must initiate due process if parent refuses placement or refuses to allow testing and screening. Now, it is the law. This is the one time that Paul Shaw's going to tell you, I'm not going to tell you to break the law. I'm going to say, kind of forget about that law. Because let me tell you what, if you are forcing a parent against their will to put Johnny in a approach they don't want, they're going to fight you every day. They're going to find something wrong. They're going to argue. They're going to have IEP meetings every month. They're going to go and seek legal counsel. They're going to do all kinds of things because they have so many rights that it'll drive it. It's not worth it. You don't want to get a parent so mad at you that they're going to be constantly doing a lawsuit. And so I would just say that if the child just never can be successful, then maybe at some point you do have to tell that parent, well, by law we've got to get Johnny some services. But bottom line, I'm going to try to work with the parents and not make them mad. Once permission is received, a school system has 60 days to complete the process of testing the child. Now, can I go to Megan and say, Megan, I want to test your child, and she says yes verbally? Is that good enough?
No.
Absolutely not. She has to sign written permission in order to test your child. If I go and test Wayne without parents' knowledge, I violated the law, because it clearly says that you have to get permission from the parents before we test the child. Now, we'll go one step further. Mike and Megan have gotten a divorce. Megan says, my child is not going to be placed in special education because my child is like me. She's a good student. Mike says, oh Lord, my child's really suffering. And he signs the document allowing placement, allowing us to test him. And in the court system, they both have joint custody. The child lives with Megan because Mike's been kicked out. But Mike is still considered one of the parents. Can we legally take his signature and test the child even though Megan didn't approve of it?
Yes.
Absolutely. As long as one parent agrees to it, we can do it. Now, I'm going to go back and say, you don't want to make parents mad. You want to try to work together. But bottom line, if one parent will agree to it, you may do it. It doesn't take both signatures. Now, once permission is received, like I said, you have 60 days to complete the process, and then you have another 30 days in which to determine the child qualifies for special services. So a total of 90 days once the agreement is done to test. Now, back in the old days, some of these attorneys got pretty smart about special education. And so they would request an evaluation in May and say, I get permission to test my child. Well, what happened back in the 70s and 80s in a lot of school districts?
They went home for the summer.
Right. And who else went home? Teachers, right. So you had June, July, and August that there wasn't anybody able to do the testing. Did they meet that 60-day requirement? And then the attorneys would sue the school system for failure to follow that. That's why we have school psychologists that work more months and all that. But we've got a little more sophisticated, but that's how some of the attorneys would work, is they would wait until the parent, wait until May and do it and then request it, and then it'll meet the 60-day requirement. Then we'll take care of that issue.
Ambulance chasers.
And believe me, it is a lot cheaper to solve most cases out of court than in court. We talked about it as a free public, free appropriate public education and least restrictive environment. Now, steps to the placement of students with disabilities in the least restrictive environment. Educator notes a child is having difficulty in the classroom. That's usually the first step of a child. Now, there are some children that's obvious that they have a disability, and that certainly speeds up the process. But when we talk about intellectually, we probably need to at least look at that. And so the educator notes the child is having problems. The student support team is initiated, like we talked about, response to intervention, modification of the classroom is attempted unsuccessfully. Notice I said plural modifications, because you can't just try one strategy and say, well, he qualifies for special ed. Initial referral for evaluation with written approval of parent. I didn't say parents, parent. The evaluation team determines what program the student qualifies for placement. You have the IEP placement meeting. The IEP is developed to meet the student's individual needs. Now, I did say individual needs, but let me go one step further. You're really supposed to develop that IEP in that IEP meeting. But let me tell you what, as a school system, you better already have your act together and know what you're recommending, make sure everybody's on kind of the same page. Because all we need is to have 4 teachers in this room, the IEP meeting, and I'm the parent, and then Megan says, well, I don't think he needs someone, so we don't need this. And then Chris said, well, yeah, but he does. And then Pat said, yeah, but how about this? I mean, you look totally unprepared, unprofessional, and incompetent when you can't agree. So I would say make sure you have some type of agreement beforehand. If you can't agree, my advice is you need to grab that school psychologist, your principal, something, say, if I go to that meeting, this is what I'm going to say, so you need to be prepared for it, because I cannot agree to such and such. Either I'm not going to let you go to the meeting, or we're going to change the IEP before we have the parent meeting. So I just think it's important, because the more professional and caring you can be in that meeting, the more opportunity you have to win over that parent. And you don't need to vote. Okay, everybody agree with this? Raise your hand. It's not that, it's kind of consensus. You just say, we've agreed to do this and this. Everybody okay? Move right on. You don't call for a vote. You got to determine the least restrictive environment, what type of services you can provide, how they're going to be delivered. You have to have an annual review and IEP development. Now, review is not the same thing as the 3-year cycle. And then you got to determine if objectives are being met. Every year you need to look and see what goals and objectives are being met. And how about I'll get delivery of service the second time, sorry. An IEP provides meaningful access to educational opportunity, not the specific achievement of educational results, but it is a commitment to provide services. When an IEP is signed, you are committing to provide services. And by the way, that is what type of document is that?
Legal.
Not only legal, but I'm looking for even a tougher word.
Oh, binding.
Federal.
Federal, there you go. Because remember, federal is a lot tougher than state. Let me tell you, you don't want to mess with feds. They have plenty of money and everything else. Review annually at a minimum. You ought to look at that. And if a parent after 3 months wants to come and sit down with you and review the IEP, what should you do? Yeah, we'll be glad to do it. Because they can request that meeting. You certainly want to do it, because if not, then they will request a placement hearing. And then you go and have to, go in front of a, quote, non-partial judge. But officially, they are reevaluated every 3 years. Even though you evaluate, kind of looking at every year, seeing the progress, every 3 years they have to be retested, reevaluated to determine if they still qualify for the special services. Scheduling, when you have the IEP meeting, you can't say, well, Megan, we're gonna do it at 11 o'clock at night, because I believe you work the night shift at the industry from 9 to 5, so we're gonna meet at 11 o'clock at night. No, you gotta say, when's a good time for you to meet? Because we really need your input as a parent on the services we provide Susie. Can you come on Thursday at 2 o'clock? And she says, no, but I can come at 3. Then what do? We have it at 3 o'clock. And of course, then you have some parents like Megan, that 3 o'clock comes, no show. You try to call her, and then you finally get in touch about 4:30. Oh, I forgot, I'm sorry, I didn't have it on my calendar. So then you have to reschedule, because it is important that you show that you're trying to involve the parents in that. And if they don't show again, you have to document that you've called her, you've sent letters, and that she's still in. Then you can have the meeting without the parent involved, once you can show that they have it coming, you try to get them there. You send a notice to the parents in advance. I don't send that notice and say, by the way, tomorrow at 11 o'clock you got to do it. You got to give them enough time to make some changes. Include participants who will be attending. And you don't have to give the exact names. You can say, well, the school psychologist is going to be at the meeting. We're going to have a classroom teacher at the meeting. We're going to have the special education committee. We're going to have the guidance counselor there. You know, you said that. And at the same time, you give the purpose of the meeting. We're going to review Johnny's testing and determine if he needs special services. And you want to tell the parents, you have a right to bring people too. And oh, by the way, if you bring people, do you mind letting us know who this could be? Because here's the thing, if that parent says, I'm bringing my next attorney, he's a damn attorney, then what do you want to do? You probably want to have your attorney there as well. But you don't really want battles, you know. But here's the other thing. Poor Megan comes into this IEP meeting, and then she's sitting in front of about 6 or 7 teachers and administrators and guidance counselors. Do you think she feels a little bit intimidated? Absolutely. And so that's why you say, well, you can bring somebody. Sometimes there's a child advocate that comes, sometimes it's the preacher, sometimes it's another family member. But you have to understand, you need to kind of put her at ease and let her know that we all want what's best for little Susie. Like I said, the best practice, ask the parents who they're going to bring, because it certainly helps to know. All right. An IEP is a statement of special education related services provided to the child. It's developed at the meeting. That's when you kind of agree to it. But like I said, you better pretty much already have it in line. But you just still want to say, Megan, what do you think about this? This is what we suggest. And she said, well, I don't know. Maybe can we do this instead? You know, you might want to at least listen and see if that's a reasonable request. If it's reasonable, you probably want to add it. If it's not reasonable, then you don't want to do it. You have to do the notification meeting early enough for parents to make plans to attend, and it must be agreed upon mutually, and parents have a right to know the options considered. You can say, well, we consider this, this, and this, but this is what we felt was the best placement for Susie, and this is why. And the parent has the right to see all records concerning placement may request a hearing if you don't want to show it to them. But you have the right to see what tests you used, how the child scored, all that type of thing. All right, what must be in an IEP? PLAF. I tell you what, that's present levels of academic and functional performance. I assume that's what y'all still use. I remember I was doing this about 7 or 8 years ago, and it was PLOP, present level of performance. And I went and rolled that out and said, present level of performance. And one of the teachers said, we don't use that anymore. So it is now PLAF. I don't think it's changed. I'm not in the school system on a daily basis, but I think that's still what it is, academic and functional performance. Measurable annual goals. I can't write in there that Chris is going to be successful. What is success? Coming to school every day? It may be being absent 2 days a week to give me a rest. I don't know. But because it doesn't say measure. But if Chris is going to be able to know his timetables for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, that's pretty measurable. Because I can say 6 times 6. If you can get it to me, of course we will probably rehearse beforehand where I can show off that he knows that. All right. Statement of special education services and related services, because sometimes we have to give related services. Let me ask you this. How many of you have seen us transport, or the schools transport children in a wheelchair? That's a related service, because we have to have what kind of bus? A special bus with a lift on it, and you know, and places you can roll them and strap them down. And student participating in the regular program, you have to have some type of the least restrictive environment where you can't isolate them. As Patrick said when he was talking about his case, you're asking for trouble if you isolate them. And you gotta have some type of test, and what type of test is the kid gonna take once they're enrolled in the program? Do you expect them to take the milestones test, or are they gonna take the alternative assessment test that's available for like about 2% of the students? You've gotta decide that. What kind of modifications are they gonna have? And what type of transitional services? And we'll talk about transitional services in a little bit. IEP, team must consider each point in the continuum of services, starting with the general education environment and working down to the right blend of services and placement for the student's needs. Remember, we said we have to come up with an appropriate program first, then we decide about the least restrictive environment. We also must show when the service will start and when they'll end. And usually it's 3 years because you have to retest then. Must contain a statement of the standard by which the child's program will be reviewed every year. IEP updated annually, retested every 3 years, as we've already talked about. You want to invite a regular classroom teacher? Why would we invite a regular classroom teacher when Jonah doesn't know a darn thing about special education?
Where's my time? I'm just playing.
It's because she can tell the parent what skills the child needs, or the regular children need in that grade level. That's why you have a regular classroom teacher. They can speak to the curriculum, the standards, and the skills that are needed for that grade. The special education teacher goes out, special education teacher to what? Provide services to that student. Supervisor can interpret the data and have knowledge of district resources. And that's changed. It used to say administrator. But it got, I mean, you think about the end of the year when you're having all these meetings, there's no way an assistant principal or principal get all those meetings, so they say supervisor. And sometimes it's a lead special education teacher that is the quote supervisor. But the reason they want to insist on a supervisor is somebody has to have the authority to make decisions. Just like if the parent requests that horseback riding, thing. You got to have somebody to say that, yeah, we can budget for that, or no, we're not going to agree to that. But you got to have somebody that can not only make a decision, but assure that the funding's there if the decision is being made. Regular teachers' role is to acknowledge what regular students should be learning. IEP minutes are not required, but if they're taken, you do them well. I mean, you be exact. I personally wouldn't take minutes. Now, if I had attorneys there, I might want to hire me a stenographer or somebody to take if I thought it was going to be a real contentious meeting. But other than that, I wouldn't take minutes. Yes.
I'm just curious, how does middle school and high school do IEPs? Like if you're recommending a student for the process, like
We
does the
still meet as
homeroom
a-
teacher go sit in on it? Like
Like-
for us, we're like
You're the classroom
I'm a
teacher.
classroom teacher, so
You
I
just have
sit in on my students. So like if
I'll
they're
give you my
saying-
answer and I'll let them give their answer. For me, I'd take somebody that's a little bit knowledgeable about special ed and one that knows how to do meetings and get along with parents. It's not to be the coach that's going to sit there and look at his watch and try to chew tobacco while they're doing that. I don't mean that way. But now, what would y'all say?
So like in a middle school setting, we teach kind of as a team, sort of. So then we get an email and it just says one special ed teacher needs to attend it. So then we all
One
draw
regular.
straws. Yeah, sorry.
Ours,
We all
they
draw
invite
straws to see
somebody.
who's gonna go.
Ours is more like yours, like our special ed teacher will send an email saying
Yeah.
you've been invited to this meeting.
Do you?
It's like, congratulations, you've been selected.
Yeah, they're a kid in your
Ideally,
class.
Okay.
but not always.
Oh, I've never
Okay.
been to one that wasn't a kid I taught.
Our particular school requires every teacher, period.
Wow.
So it'd really be 6 teachers if you got 6 periods, or a few on the block schedule before. I don't know.
We got 7
7
classes.
Okay.
So you can't like just give notes to the person?
Well, if Patrick were say, let's say he's going to be involved in the drama performance and they're going to be out of town, he could leave
Oh,
he could
okay.
leave notes and he could be excused from the meeting.
They don't let us do that, but it's legally possible.
We're required to take minutes.
Are you?
I don't know if that's going to
I-
happen.
You personally, or?
If we're in an IEP meeting, it came through last year, somebody has to be taking.
We do have that, and our APs are always
The
trying to get
AP,
teachers to do
somebody
that.
We never had to.
I'm not really in favor of it, but it's probably not a bad idea. I'll say this, when we have principals meetings, assistant principal meetings, teacher meetings, we always took minutes because I wanted to be able to say, well, this is what I said. I always wanted to read the minutes to make sure they reflected what we did. But you know, when you start messing with the federal, I don't like to have notes. But if you take them, you better take meticulous notes, is what I'm saying. Do not state as facts, but as concern. Don't say Johnny's dumb as dirt and is very unsuccessful. You might say, I'm concerned that Johnny is struggling in school. That's a nice way to say it, okay? And that's what you got to search for, is to be able to convey your concerns without saying it's a fact. Cover letter should express that it is open for review, and documents should reflect the draft when you send out that invitation to come to the IEP meeting. That's our team. You know, these are people that can be involved, and I don't think you'll ever see that many, but you can have the parent or the guardian, you can have an audiologist, particularly if it's a hearing impaired, you can have an ophthalmologist, early childhood special educator, physician, nurse, occupational therapist, psychologist, social worker, speech and language pathologist. You can have all of those. I mean, but it's highly unlikely that you're going to have all of them. But and that list is not, you know, everybody. All right, the agenda. You want to introduce people. You want to try to make people feel welcome to the school, and that you all have a genuine concern. You're all there for the same reason, to help little Susie be successful in school. You want to talk about the present level of performance. You want to talk about the facts of what you have there about how the child is performing. Then you want to establish the goals. This is what we have for little Susie. This is what the goals we'd like her to achieve next year. We'd like to talk about the special education services we will provide and the related services. We're going to talk about accommodations. It may be that if she has poor motor skills, that you might have to get her a computer. Or it might be that you've got to give her something where she can talk into the computer and the computer types for you. So I mean, there's all kinds of things that can be done. You've got to talk about what assessments the child's going to be participating. Beginning and ending dates of services. Special factors: behavior, limited English proficiency, blind, visually impaired, communication needs, assistive technology. You know, back when this first started, it was so hard for teachers to realize that students need special accommodation. And they really were, because their attitude when they weren't trained, particularly in the 70s, was to talk about, well, I'm teaching, if they can't get it, tough. Because I went over it and I did the notes and I copied the notes on the board and all that. Well, you know, about the only thing that teachers really could understand at that point in time, they did realize that if a child was blind and they were writing notes on the board, they honestly didn't expect that child to copy the notes. They knew they had to provide a copy for that child to take home to the parents. But other than that, you know, you couldn't get teachers to agree to accommodations, because I've taught it and they should know it. And then finally, you got to decide on what is the appropriate placement for the child. All right, topics to avoid at IEP meetings. Number one, dissatisfaction of the teacher. If that parent comes in and says, well, I don't like Patrick Norton, he's a sorry teacher. You don't say, well, listen, we're not here about that. We're here to talk about little Susie, little Johnny. If you've got concerns about Miss Norton, you need to go talk with the administrator later on. But we're not here for that purpose. So you need to stop that right. It's not a gripe session. Number two, well, look, they suspended my child over there, and I'm real upset because Mike got suspended, but Chris didn't. And you say, well, this is not what we're here for. You need to take that with the administrator as well. So you don't try to solve all the world's problems. You deal with what you're assigned to do. And same thing with dissatisfaction of grades. If my little Susie made a C and she's never made a C before, it's all Keisha's fault. You just say, well, you need to take that with the teacher and the administrator. You don't want to get into that argument. And just satisfy the location. Remember, I told you that some parents want their child to go to Valley School District rather than Mountain Elementary School. They want to go to Valley, but it may be that Mountain Elementary is the only one that offers this assigned program. So you have to be careful about that, because you can't say, you have to say, well, this is the only place we have this program. And you can't talk about financial considerations. You can't say, well, you know, we're a poor school district. I don't know if we can do that or not. You don't say it that way. A couple other things you don't say. This is the best placement. Because we really don't know until the child gets involved and do that. And you can't say, you sign there, this is the best place for your child. You don't say that. Let's vote. Because you've got 6 teachers and 1 parent. Hell, who's going to win the vote? All right, so, I mean, you want to try to have consensus, and if the parents don't come, you kind of want to talk a little bit more, but the bottom line, you might say, well, it seems like that we've got agreement, we've got a consensus that this is what's best for Johnny, and move on. We've never done that before. We've never offered horseback riding lessons. You know, might be a first time for everything. You never know. Well, that's not fair to other students. If we do this for Johnny, then what are we going to do for other students? You can't worry about that. You just got to worry about Johnny. Oh, it costs too much. If you know that costs too much, let them take them to one of these special schools and see what it costs. And we don't do that here. Absolutely not. We're not going to be copying notes and giving it to him. And also, let me tell you, if you send an email, just remember that's there forever. So if you're writing Patrick email and you're one of the other teachers, and you talk to Patrick and you say, God, I can't believe the IEP meeting. Johnny's dumb as dirt, and his mother's worse. You know, sometimes he goes to court. They're going to be subpoenaing emails, and that's certainly not going to make people happy when y'all send emails about a student and disparaging them. So be careful of what you say in a meeting, and be careful what you put in an email, because you don't want that to come back in court and haunt you. All right, the court requirements, we talked about a little bit when we had that disagreement with that parent that wanted their autistic child to be, you know, in the regular environment as much as possible in the school. So what they want to look for, did you comply with IEP, with IDEA? Was IEP developed as required and reasonably calculated to every child to receive an educational benefit? We got a little bit higher level now. They can't just be the minimum, but it's got to benefit the child, the program that you've got. Sometimes the judge is influenced by emotion. They're human beings too. And sometimes when Megan brings her child in, the child's in a wheelchair, and before and Megan's boo-hooing, that judge is liable to throw out all the laws and say, oh yeah, I understand you. For my child, I'd want that too. So you have to be careful. When you go in front of the judge, you don't know what they're going to do. So you want to get your act together, and you want to try to resolve it before it goes to a judge. Extended services is based on the needs of the child. The IEP determines the services, and you can't limit the amount of duration. In other words, it may be that Wayne needs 12 months of service, and then when school's out in May, he's going to still get some services. We can't say, oh no, we don't do that during the summer. If he needs it, then we're going to provide it to him. All right, related services we talked about, and we talked about transportation as one of them. We talked about the wheelchair, but there's other related services. Interpreting services. What if if the parents don't speak English? You're going to have somebody there, the IEP meeting, that can translate for them. Psychological services. You certainly got to have some testing and interpreting. Physical therapy. Occupational therapy. If that's decided that's what's needed, you've got to provide it for them. And Lord hell, let me tell you, federal government doesn't care if you can't find somebody. That's your problem. That child needs physical therapy, and you go get physical therapy for them. I don't care if you have to go to Atlanta and fly somebody by helicopter to your school district to do it. You go find the services. So you can't say, we can't provide that service because we can't find somebody. If it's needed, you better go start looking. You can do a nationwide search. I'd volunteer to go to Hawaii to look for somebody. Rehabilitation counseling, mobility services, medical services for diagnostic and evaluation purposes, health services, social worker services, parent counseling and training. And believe me, there's some parents that need training. I mean, I don't mean that ugly, but sometimes parents have never been associated and their child's been retarded. It's a stress on everybody. They might need some type of parenting skills to help Johnny at home as well as at school. So, I mean, that's maybe needed. Transitional services, you know, I kind of skimmed over that, but it's a coordinated set of activities designed to facilitate movement from school to post-school activities. In other words, transitional service is preparing a child that when they get out of school, usually at age 21 especially, there you go, that they can then move into the workplace and be self-sufficient. Now, not every child's going to be that way, but that's the purpose of having transitional services, is to help prepare that child for life after school. And it starts at age 14, It has to be updated annually. And normally the reason they use age 14 is because that's normally when they kind of move into the 9th grade for the high school.
We do
Now,
it in 8th grade for the 9th grade. So they're
yeah,
going
you may have some kids that have loved school so much that they've stayed in the 2nd grade a couple of years and the 4th grade a couple of years, and they're older than that, and you have to, but when they turn 14, you're supposed to provide transitional services. You should take into account the student's strengths, purposes, and interests. If the child loves the outdoors and thinks they want to be in farming or something else outside, you shouldn't assign them in a warehouse to work and get training. I mean, you may not have any choice, particularly in the smaller school systems and rural, they may not have a whole lot of options of where to put the children, but basically when you put a child in some type of training, you need to consider their needs and interests. Evaluation, you can need to evaluate their health, their vision, because truly it could be that the child's blurred vision, that's why they're having problems, not because they're disabled, they just can't see. Hearing, social and emotional status, general intelligence, academic performance, speech and language abilities, motor ability, all of these have to be taken into consideration when you're trying to test a child to determine if they need some type of special program. And it must be performed by a team of professionals. You can't just have one person doing it, because that one person may be prejudiced or something of that sort, so you need to have a team. You gotta have more than one to perform the guidelines. The test is given the child's primary language. We talked about that. Must not be culturally or racially biased. Must be appropriate. Comprehensive assessment completed every 3 years. Remember, we do it every 3 years. Parents' rights. Parents have a right to all records. Parents have a right to request a hearing. Assessment strategies. You need to give more than one type of test. It can be normal reference. It can be diagnostic. It can be an interview. It can be observation. And it can be an informal assessment. All of those are appropriate to look and see how Johnny and Susie are doing, and you need to have more than one. And then you can do a portfolio assessment as well. Educational records, know what records are being collected, maintained, and used by the school district, where they're located. We talked about that when we talked about FERPA. Right to inspect and review all records. Have someone at school explain or interpret the records, because I guarantee you most parents don't know what a stain line is. And I'm not so sure if you ask me right now to define it, that I could do it appropriate for an English teacher. Make copies of the child's records at a reasonable cost. You can't say, yeah, I'll copy the pages for $20 each. And like I said, you don't want to make the parent mad. I'd probably make copies for them, unless it's one was going to take me 3 days to do it. Give consent before the child's records to be seen by someone not involved in his or her education. If Mike is concerned because his daughter's dating a student that he thinks is special ed, he can't go to the school and say, let me look at his records, because he has no right to those records. Know who has seen the child's records and why. That's why you're supposed to sign once you've looked at records. You can ask for a change in the child's record because they think a statement's wrong, just like we talked about with FERPA. Right to request a hearing. Placement list. These are the ones like, least restricted environment. You can have a general education where the child doesn't receive any service because they're performing well. Consultation. That's where special education walks by and says, hey Patrick, how's Chris doing? Good, I'm glad to hear that. Before Patrick has a chance to say, well, he's having a problem. And I'm going to constantly say, good, I'm glad to hear he's doing well. Walking off. I mean, really, consultative services where I don't even have to go in the classroom. I'm just checking with the teacher and see if there's any problems. And I may drop by Patrick's class about drop by and ask him about once every 2 or 3 weeks. If he starts whining and complaining, I may be there every 4 or 5 weeks. But anyhow, that's the second least restricted. General education with supports and aids. It could be a hearing aid, it could be a computer, it could be all kinds of things like that. Supportive instruction, collaborative or co-teaching, and research, what I'm told and from what I've read, is supposedly the best type of educational service. It seems to be successful. You got co-teachers. I'm not a real co-teacher fan simply because I find it hard to share with somebody else. If I want to teach, I want to teach. If you want to teach, I'll let you teach. I don't mean that ugly. It's hard for personalities to mesh and do that, but quite frankly, the best collaborative teaching, you don't know which one's a special education teacher. I mean, and if you can get that, that is the best.
I have a collab. I collab with another teacher, and when you walk in, you really don't know
and that's
the
good.
teacher.
Yeah.
And we do mesh well. When you have somebody you don't, it's hard.
And when somebody doesn't pull the weight,
Mhm.
you're exactly right.
Same here. I have somebody in my room almost all day now.
They're good or bad?
I have two, actually.
They're good or bad?
It's great.
Good.
Yeah.
Good. Hey, it's working. That's great.
I loved it, good, yeah.
Then you have the resource where they pull out, for like a class or, that. Then you have self-contained. Alternative placement, which would be a school like the School for the Blind, or it could be one of those fancy $70,000 tuition. Residential, home instruction, hospital, homebound. If a child's in the hospital, if they're going to be there for a extended amount of time, you have to provide homebound for them. Parents' right, have a right to independent. If they don't like your evaluation, they have a right to an independent evaluation. However, you don't tell the parent, okay, you go and let Dr. Johnson evaluate. Whatever he evaluates, we'll do. Absolutely not. You say, you're welcome to get a second opinion. We'll be glad to look at it. We'll be glad to consider it. Now, have I promised anything other than consider it? Because let me tell you, you pay enough money, you can get about any type of statement you want from somebody.
48 sessions.
School districts must tell parents where they can obtain an independent evaluation. Independent evaluation must be considered. Let's say considered. School district must pay for independent evaluation unless school district requests hearing and is found that the hearing that the school district evaluation was appropriate. In other words, if a parent doesn't like it and they want an independent, you can do that unless you want to go to court and prove that your evaluation was appropriate. Hearings and appeals must be conducted by an impartial hearing officer. This is where people complain sometimes. Well, you get paid by the school district. You ought to be, you're probably prejudiced. Well, if you're going to be a hearing officer, that's all you need to do. You can't be a special education teacher. Part of the day, this is your regular job, as you are hired to be an impartial hearing officer. Now, once this is appealed, you can't jerk Johnny around and move him somewhere else. He has to stay put in Jonah's class until you get this resolved. Now, if Johnny had threatened Jonah and pulled out a switchblade and maybe even cut her on the cheek or something like that, then yeah, we could probably move him because he's a danger. But that's the only time. You can't just move Johnny because you think he needs to be in somebody else's class. It has to be pretty strong. We'll talk about that in a few minutes as well. And it does allow, like I said, it does allow alternative placement if the child poses a danger. If he pulls a switchblade and cuts the teacher, I'd say that's posing a danger. Unless he did one I was trying to get rid of anyhow. All right. They do have a right to have an attorney or anyone with knowledge about the child's ability. And I've actually seen situations where they've gone and gotten a teacher from another school district to come and be with them during the hearings. Right to provide evidence and documentation to provide, to support positions taken in the hearing. Right to provide the hearing also with the names of people to be questioned, because you can bring your own witnesses in. And to ask questions of the teachers, diagnosticians, and others, because it's a hearing, and it's kind of like a court of law. You prevent the hearing officer from considering anything not shown to both parties at least 5 days in advance. This is not Perry Mason, where the last second they bring a surprise witness in and saves the day. No, if you haven't listed that person as being, so if you haven't provided that documentation, you can't do it. You've got to give at least 5 days notice so that both sides have an opportunity to prepare. You can ask a hearing officer to order another evaluation at school district expense if you're not satisfied. You can get a tape of exactly what everyone said at the meeting, because with those hearings, usually somebody is either a court stenographer taking them, or you've got the audio playing and somebody transcribes that afterwards, so you have a record, or you make enough copies of the audio that if somebody wants to listen to it, you can. To get a written copy of the hearing officer's decision, and he has to give you a statement of why he made the decision he did, or that she made the decision that she did. And to request an open hearing, otherwise it's closed. But you can request an open hearing. Appeals. Hearing officer's decision is final unless parent or school system appeals to the state education agency. What education agency do you think it goes to? State Board of Education. Just like with students, when they appeal a disciplinary hearing, it goes right to the state agency. School system is ensure that an impartial hearing is conducted. and then 45 days of request, and the decision is within the 30 days after hearing. That's 75 days longer than it takes. That's another reason you want to try to avoid things like that. In the meantime, little Johnny stays in the classroom unless there's a good reason why not. The official conducting review may seek additional evidence, offer an opportunity to make oral or written arguments, render a decision, after reviewing all the evidence, give each party a copy of the decision, a statement of the facts relied upon making the decision, and the decision of the hearing also may be appealed to the federal courts, particularly in special education. All right, graduation and competency exams, special education services terminate on graduation or age of eligibility, which is once he turns 21 years of age. Okay? Now, the ruling has been that if you are working towards your high school diploma, you have to meet all the requirements that a, quote, regular education student would be. We used to have those, what were they called? It was a test. It wasn't in the course test, but it was something else like a milestones that you had to pass in order to graduate. They did away with that about 4 or 5 years ago. I made it doubly tough on some of these special education kids. They would earn credit for the class, but couldn't pass the test.
Oh, the graduation test.
Yeah, thank you. That's what it's called, graduation test. Required to pass state competency test to earn a high school diploma just as regular students. Because somebody questioned that in Illinois in 1983, and they ruled that if you're working on a regular diploma, you have to do it. And like I said, state competency test is no longer required in Georgia. Discipline. Special concerns exist in disciplining children with disabilities. You have to have a manifestation hearing. If you want to punish Johnny for his discipline, the first thing you got to do is you got to convene a meeting and have a manifestation to determine if Johnny's behavior was caused by his disability or whether Johnny actually knew better. Now, folks, when you're, how should I say this? When you are identified as behavior disorder, you pretty much have carte blanche on any type of behavior because it's part of your disability, right? Oh, Johnny just lost his school because that's what he has. He has an emotional outburst. If determined not to be caused by the disability, then you can proceed with the discipline the same manner of a regular student, but it's only after the manifestation hearing is held. If manifestation of disability is determined, child may be placed in an alternative program not to exceed 10 days. Alternative placement alternatives include use of study counts, timeouts, detention, restriction, short-time suspension. So, if I'm taking Mike and putting him in the back corner because he's been disrupting class, that really is an alternative placement because I'm isolating him. Or it could be that I just take a couple of, you know how you have those cardboard kind of boxes and just kind of make a carol for him? That still may be something where it would be isolation.
They even had desks like that.
Yeah, exactly. And I've seen people take a belt and tie it to a student to the chair so they can't get up. I'm not so sure that's a good thing to do, but it has been done before, okay? All right. You must develop a BIP, which is a behavior intervention plan, using specific strategies. And by the way, this behavior intervention plan, it has to have what? Positive plan, not negative. In other words, you can't say, well, part of my behavior plan for Kakisha is to take this ruler and pop her on the arm every time she speaks out without me recognizing her. That would not be positive. You have to have a positive plan. Placement in another program requires a meeting with the IEP and changes to the IEP document approved by parents and educators. You can't just unilaterally move Johnny from resource to self-contained. You have to have a meeting. You have to have that. And of course, if the parent disagrees, they have a right to ask for a hearing. You cannot move them without that. All right, now, the good thing is a serious infraction. You may request from a hearing officer change in place for up to 45 days. Now, what I would tell you is it's a lot easier, instead of the school district handling some things, to let police handle it, because they don't have the same requirements as we do when it comes to working with students with disabilities. And we do have serious infractions, which I call the big three. That's if a student has a weapon, if they're selling drugs, or if they've inflicted bodily injury to somebody, like I talked about with Jonah getting that knife and slashing. Those are the big three. But folks, I believe I'd let my law enforcement people handle that rather than the school. But I mean, I would try to handle it as well. And But actually, you have to continue providing services even to students in jail. If they have an IEP and you haven't provided service, you got to find somebody. It's kind of like homebound. You got to go and give them services. Unless they, well, now if they did the big three like drugs and that's why they're in jail, then you could probably stop service at that point in time. Law enforcement personnel is not held to the same requirements because they have a duty to protect the public. Must provide students with rights of students with disabilities if parents express concern to educate and right that child may need special education related services. I can see it now. Megan's child is a senior, and he's kind of a little bit of a rounder, you know, and he tends to get on thin ice sometimes, and she's worried sick that he's going to do something stupid his senior year in which he may get expelled and not be able to graduate. So about March, when it gets to be where most kids are feeling that spring fever, she goes to the principal and says, you know, I'm really concerned about my son Johnny. I really think he's got some emotional problems and really feels the pressures and things, and I think he probably needs to be tested. Well, guess what? When Megan says that, that has basically opened the door for him to have special education consideration, because she's asked for the test and she stated that he may have some problems, and bottom line, you can't treat him like a regular student. Now after you've tested him and he doesn't qualify, then you can, but the bottom line, it's the same way with Keisha. If she says, my God, Chris is ADD, you know, he's just stupid. Well, bottom line, when she has identified him as ADD, she's also given him some type of rights, because now she has said, I think he's special education, I think he has some disorders, and he needs to be tested. Now, here's another question. She would be doing right to identify him as ADD. She's not a school psychologist. She has no more credentials than the man in the moon. But yet she said that and creates a problem with the school. So you really have to be careful of what you say about students. You can't say he's ADD. You might be able to say, I think he exhibits some symptoms that concern me. But you can't say he's EBD. Well, you can say, but you shouldn't.
Yeah.
The parent of the child has requested an evaluation of the child. The educators express concern around the child's behavior to supervisor personnel, like I mentioned to the principal, like Megan mentioned. All right, guidelines for discipline of students. You might as well know right now that who's protected. Make sure that a multidisciplinary team has determined the offense is not a disability, because you had that manifestation hearing. And you really have to acknowledge that double standards do exist, because there's one set of rules for students that have been identified with disability and another set of rules for those that are in the regular classroom. In an attempt to reach an agreement with the parents, you can't exceed the 10-day limit with approval of the parents. Remember, after 10 days, it's considered a placement. But if you have a good relationship with that parent, you might not want to say, you know, this is really serious and we really need Johnny to take a little more time out. Let's keep him out at least 12 or 13 days. If the parent agrees to it, then you're fine. Document, document, document. You can expel kids, you can discipline kids, but you really, at this point in time, it's really important that you have the documentation to support it. And by the way, you can video. You know, if he's having a temper tantrum, I'm gonna whip up my phone and I'm gonna video his temper tantrum. So I'll have some type of documentation. And I know sometimes you go, well, can I do that? You're doing right, you can. Call police as necessary, particularly for weapons, drugs. The juvenile home time does not count against the 10 days. So if the juvenile justice is taking him off, the clock's not ticking. Be prepared to go to court. It's your duty to provide a safe school environment. Don't be afraid of the stay put provision, because if there's a stall tactic going on, you can go to a court, you can get a judge to issue some type of injunction, and you can go ahead and proceed and get something done, particularly if this could be some type of danger. All right. We'll talk about a couple other cases, and one, again, Georgia Association of Retarded Citizens versus McDaniel. Anybody know who McDaniel is? 1983. That's right, Rebecca. He was the state superintendent. And the kids, they had said, the parents had come and said, my child needs more than 180 days of school, because when they're out for 3 months, then they missing, they're losing what they've learned. And of course, the state superintendent said, no, we're not going to provide any education past 180 days. We provide all students. Well, they took it to court. This is how the courts ruled. Yes, if you can prove that child needs additional help to retain that knowledge, you will provide it to them. So that's why some kids get trained 12 months out of the year. If the IEP states that he gets it or she gets it, that's what happens. But Daniel was the state superintendent at the time when they refused to do that. And so extended service are required to some students who have a disability. Irving Independent School District versus Tatro. Again, this is just 9 years after we started enforcing this, and so you can kind of think it's silly now. But there was a parent of an 8-year-old girl with spinal bifida, and she needed to have a clean intermittent catheterization be performed by school district personnel as related service, because she needed to have that cleaned every couple of hours to maintain her health. And the schools, oh, we can't do that, my gosh. And so when they refused, they went to court. And what do you think the courts ruled? They ruled in favor of the student, because my gosh, they said that she needs that service every 3 to 4 years, and quite frankly, it doesn't take but about 5 minutes to train somebody. It's not that big a deal. But back during that time, everything was a big deal, and people were scared of doing things for students. Another case, Honey versus Doe. California school officials attempt to expel 2 emotionally disturbed students from school indefinitely for violent and disruptive conduct. And the ruling was established that procedural protection, in other words, you can't kick these students out until after you have the hearing, until after you make all the decisions. But they did allow with this that you can put them in an alternative placement if they are that disruptive. Okay? All right. Now we talked about Andrew F. versus Douglas, and that was where they were questioning the de minimis, or how shall I say it, just the bottom line education. Went to court. Neil Gorsuch was, I couldn't remember the day, did not rule the program offered must be substantially equal to progress for non-students, but the plan must be reasonably calculated for students to show progress. So both sides celebrated that they won. I vote for the one that won $1.3 million. But the bottom line is the other school says, see, we don't have to offer that Cadillac service. As long as we're offering something that's reasonable and can meet the child's needs, then we're okay. And then you have Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act, 1973. It protects any person who has a mental or physical impairment which substantially limits one or more life activities. The key that you need to know about this 504 is it's not just for students, but who else? Adults. Right, adults. This applies for adults too. That's why sometimes you've got a person that may not be able to climb the stairs and go to the second floor to teach. They have to have a classroom on the first floor. Or it may be that somebody, if they have a real reaction to perfume, maybe they've got to do things. But you can see what the life activities are, and the impairments, my gosh, it's just about everything. And schools must provide reasonable accommodations to students and our employees who are protected under 504. And I can give you one example. When I got to White County, we had a teacher who had become deaf. At the time she was hired, she hadn't lost all her hearing, but she had then. And the previous superintendent had tried to fire her and went to court, and she won because she had a disability. And then I came in, and she was still not a very good teacher, but the reason why, she couldn't hear the students. And she could lip read, but that didn't mean she interpreted everything. And so we started trying to document, and I actually brought in somebody that I knew that had a doctorate, who had been a hearing impaired, a teacher of the hearing impaired, and had been a special education director and had a doctorate and did it. And when she went and observed, and she told him, she said, Paul, it's kind of like this. If you go to a big party and you're talking with Patrick, and Patrick's telling you about him going to Disney World, and of course you got the music playing, you got people talking, and so you don't hear everything Patrick says, but you got the gist of it. He went to Disney World with his kids during Christmas break, and that they had a good time, but you may not have heard that they went on this ride, and they went to the, this place and that place, but you got the gist. And that's kind of like the teacher, is that she would hear bits and pieces of everything. And it was almost like, if you really want to make her successful, you probably need to provide somebody to sign what the students are saying. Well, I'm gonna spend all that, so we just moved it to another situation, put in charge of a lab. And that's solved the problem. She wasn't really teaching kids, and yet I was still being fair to her because she was still being paid a teacher's salary. All right. Differences under IDA, a person must have a disability and needs specifically designed instruction where with 504, that's not necessarily the case. I do want to point again this section does include adults. The American with Disabilities Act in 1990, ADA protects handicapped persons from institutions receiving federal funds. What were some of the big changes we had to make during that time? Anybody want to make a guess?
There are ramps.
Ramps for the schools, handicap water fountains, restrooms, yeah. Those are the type of things that came in the 1990s. And I mean, it really, for some of these schools built in the 50s and 60s, that was huge after we started to do some of that. And y'all named these. And that concludes that.